The news from Rome struck Agrippina like a thunderbolt. Her beloved grandfather, Caesar Augustus, had died in the town of Nola. The official report, delivered to her husband Germanicus at his command post in Ara Ubiorum, carried even graver tidings. Agrippina's youngest brother, Postumus Agrippa, and her mother Julia were also dead. Postumus had been murdered under as yet unknown circumstances on the island of Planasia, and her mother, Julia, had been imprisoned in a single room in Rhegium until she starved to death. With the passing of Augustus, the Claudians had seized their moment, demonstrating the full weight of their ruthless ambition. At the head of her grandfather's state funeral had walked Tiberius, Livia, Castor, and Livilla, all Claudians. But Agrippina's sons, Nero and Drusus, blood descendants of Caesar Augustus, had been discreetly placed among the remainder of Augustus's extended family, a subtle yet calculated slight which revealed the Claudians' intentions. Tiberius was now Rome's imperator and pater patriae, his imperium maius and tribunicia potestas confirmed anew by the Senate. But Agrippina's husband was still the legal heir of Tiberius Caesar. In fact, had he not been so young at the time her grandfather had drawn up the succession a decade earlier, Germanicus would have been Augustus's first choice as heir. But, now that Tiberius had full control, would he honour her grandfather's wishes? Would he leave the principate to her husband Germanicus? Or would he instead favour his biological son Castor, thereby removing Agrippina's sons from the succession altogether? With the deaths of her grandfather, her brother and her mother, and the continued exile of her sister Julilla, the ascension of Tiberius cast even further uncertainty for Agrippina and for her children. However, having witnessed the removal of her family one by one, this uncertainty was not new for Agrippina. It was a way of life, a thing always to navigate. Tiberius's son, Castor, was in Rome, where he could easily play politics with those in the Senate who kowtowed to Tiberius. But Agrippina's husband, Tiberius's legal heir, held supreme command over the largest single military force in Rome's empire, 8 full legions given to him by Caesar Augustus himself. Clearly, Agrippina's grandfather meant for Germanicus to have military support with which to counter Tiberius, should he attempt to change Augustus's succession. And Agrippina had not squandered her grandfather's gift. When Agrippina and Germanicus last left Rome, their youngest son, Gaius, had been sick, forced to remain behind under the care of her grandfather's physicians. When little Gaius recovered, her grandfather sent him to her in Germania. With Agrippina's eldest sons, Drusus and Nero, kept in Rome to be formally educated, little Gaius became the last example of the lineage of Caesar Augustus, with whom to leverage continued support from the legions. Following the example set by her brother Gaius, who at the age of 12 had charmed Tiberius's legions in Germania, Agrippina fashioned a miniature soldier's outfit for her youngest son. This apparel came complete with a woolen tunic, cloth shirt, breast and backplates fastened together with straps, known as a cuirass, an iron helmet called a cassis, and the leather hobnailed sandals worn by the legions, called caligae. With the 2-year-old Gaius dressed in his Roman armour, Agrippina frequented the camps, showing her son off to the gushing legions, who made much of the adorable youth, nicknaming him Caligula, or Little Boots. Centurions and grizzled old soldiers alike would carry the toddler around, displaying him to their companies like a mascot, where they would play with the young soldier, entering into feigned combats and acting out tragic defeats to the delight of a giggling Caligula. By the time Agrippina's grandfather died, the legions at Ara Ubiorum were smitten with their mascot, and their support for the family of Germanicus and Agrippina seemed assured. However, news of Caesar Augustus's death changed everything. The mutiny began in Xanten. The units stationed under Germanicus's senior officer, Aulus Caecina Severus, were the first to become disgruntled. The Legios I Germanica, and 5 Alaudi, who had been stationed on the Rhine River since the Varian disaster 5 years earlier, were restless, and they were ripe for turmoil. A group of provocateurs within the centurion ranks, furious at the seemingly unending delay of reward promises made to them by Caesar Augustus, delivered incendiary speeches that agitated and excited the legions into a frenzy of discontent. Caesar Augustus had long ago established a military treasury to ensure bonuses and timely payments to Rome's legions. However, the practical implementation of these new reforms often fell short, leaving the soldiers aggrieved by the disparity between their actual conditions within Rome's military and the rewards they had been led to expect. Along with higher pay, the mutineers also wanted better retirement benefits. They sought the discharge bonuses promised to them by Caesar Augustus, which had never been doled out. They also sought land grants upon discharge, a traditional reward for Roman soldiers that dated back to the Republic, but was no longer reliably provided. Furthermore, the mutineers insisted on a reduction in the length of military service. They wanted their time in the legions to be reduced from the now standard 20 years, often extended by prolonged campaigns, to a maximum of 16 years for Rome's legionaries, and even shorter terms for her auxiliary forces. Before long, the discontent spread to Mogontiacum, infecting the Legios 14 Gemina and the 16 Gallica under the command of senior officer Gaius Silius. For the discontented legions of both camps, which erupted in violent rioting and bloodshed, the soldiers felt that the promises made to them by Caesar Augustus were now being outright ignored by the new regime under Tiberius Caesar. And so, pregnant once again, Agrippina left Ara Ubiorum with her husband Germanicus and her young soldier Gaius, and made her way to the military camp at Xanten, where her husband was determined to confront the growing crisis. Upon arriving in Xanten, Germanicus, whose victories in Pannonia and Germania had endeared him to the legions, ascended the military rostra. As the previously riotous assembly, now subdued and eager to hear, gathered around, Germanicus addressed their grievances. Standing before the restless soldiers, Agrippina's husband delivered a compelling speech promising to thoroughly investigate their complaints and offer concessions where feasible. His presence and assurances, delivered with the authority of a celebrated commander and member of the imperial family, restored some order and helped to placate the discontented troops, for the moment. Germanicus then sent urgent instructions to Rome, appointing his younger brother, Claudius, as his personal agent. He directed Claudius to swiftly liquidate several of Germanicus's properties and enlist the help of others to raise the necessary funds to address the unrest within the legions. Upon receiving the money, Germanicus took decisive action. Producing a dispatch bearing the signature of Tiberius Caesar, Germanicus distributed the long-overdue back pay and bonuses that had fueled the soldiers' discontent. Additionally, he granted honourable discharges to those who had served for 20 years or more, allowing them to retire and claim a portion of the rewards promised by Caesar Augustus. Although the dispatch from Tiberius mentioned that land grants for retired veterans would have to be addressed by the Senate, Germanicus's ability to deliver on other promises demonstrated to the legions at Xanten that he genuinely cared about their grievances. Gradually, the fervour of the mutiny began to subside. Agrippina and her son then followed Germanicus to Mogontiacum, where he continued to address the unrest by paying out additional overdue bonuses, retiring the most senior veterans, and restoring a sense of calm and discipline to the legions, all in the name of Tiberius. Finally, a delegation of senators arrived from Rome with a new letter from Tiberius. Read aloud from the rostra, the letter acknowledged the soldiers' discontent and lent some legitimacy to their demands. Tiberius promised to address their grievances and assured them that their overdue pay and bonuses would be rectified soon. However, Tiberius outright rejected the legion's demands for a reduction in military service and for land grants. Additionally, Tiberius called for greater discipline from the centurions and reminded the legions of their duty to Rome. When the legions at Mogontiacum heard this letter, so contradictory to the dispatch produced by Germanicus, the mutiny flared up anew. The senators barely escaped with their lives, and some of the legions even turned against Germanicus, accusing him of deception with the forged letter. Nevertheless, some within the mutiny saw the forged letter as leverage. Germanicus was already the heir to the principate, and Agrippina and Caligula, the descendants of the divine Caesar Augustus, were both present in the camp. It was soon whispered through the ranks that supporting the legitimate branch of Rome's imperial family could transform them from traitors and mutineers into heroes. Before long, the legions unanimously called for Agrippina's husband to march on Rome at the head of his 8 legions, cast Tiberius and his mother down, and proclaim himself imperator. Germanicus, however, refused, recognizing that acquiescing to the legions' notion would mean forever being controlled by them, if he was to be made imperator. Unwilling to be the puppet through which the mutinous legions might launch civil war, Agrippina's Claudian husband stood on the podium and loudly swore fealty to his adoptive father, Tiberius, and to Rome. Germanicus even went so far as to draw his gladius and point it straight at his own heart. Ready to plunge the gladius into the depths of his chest, Germanicus proclaimed, "If you persist in mutiny, if you abandon respect for authority, for the sacred duties you owe your country and your emperor, then here before you, by my own hand, will I end my life. You will then have the stain of a general's blood on your consciences and on your souls." But a legionary named Cassius, who supported leveraging Germanicus to their military ends, called his bluff. He drew his own gladius and held it up to the rostra. "If you are in earnest," Cassius taunted, "use mine, it's sharper." Germanicus then declared he would not die by the hand of a soldier, and stormed from the rostra. But Agrippina's husband made an immediate decision. That night, Germanicus, aware Agrippina's interests might align with those of the mutinous legions, decided to separate them. Without Agrippina and Caligula, the legions could no longer claim to be supporting a faction of the imperial family. Instead, they would have to end their mutiny at once, or be found in open revolt against Tiberius Caesar and against Rome. And so, the following morning, with her husband's legions as witnesses, Agrippina and her little soldier were loaded into gigs. The camp was steeped in a tense silence, the soldiers watching with bated breath as the descendants of the divine Caesar Augustus, surrounded by an armed escort, rode out of the camp, taking with them the mutinous soldiers' hopes and their plans, and leaving them filled with unresolved feelings of anger